Yet? I'm getting a notification that it's streaming live.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not. All right. So I'm not connected yet.
1 minute until showtime.
All right. We're on Facebook in like 10 seconds. We're on Periscope. YouTube is now connected as well. Let me adjust the YouTube thing. All right. Let's see. Yep. YouTube is there. Let's get the YouTube chat going. I don't know that anybody's watching, but we are there. All right, so there we go. Pop-up chat. Close that window.
Actually, I should open my YouTube, right? That's what I should do.
If you want to. I mean, there's chat on YouTube and on Facebook.
Exactly.
Well, Jennifer's back. How about all the people who were on the previous call are back? So that's good.
Excellent. Okay, here you are.
I'm Tim, Corey, Jennifer, Stephanie. Hey guys, we'll start in less than a minute.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron and Amy show. Hey Amy, how's it going?
Hello, it's going okay over here. We've got daylight savings time. You know, we're suffering.
Yeah, the government is trying to help you sleep better or to have more or less hours. I don't know what they're trying to do exactly. It used to make sense when there were farmers and it used to help the farmers, I guess, but such a small fraction of the population today are farmers. Who cares? But
actually have a couple of things about this in the program notes for you to consider, because I think we should talk about whether this is a good idea anymore or not, because
let me just say, Puerto Rico has no daylight savings time, so I am now only 3 hours away from you as a consequence.
Oh,
so, yeah, okay. Puerto Rico is far ahead of the rest of the country in terms of
Arizona also doesn't have it
in terms of implementing rational policies. So yeah, I'm a little jet lagged. I flew in. I flew into Denver on Thursday from London, and then had to go from Denver to Charlotte because you can't get from Denver to Puerto Rico. I'm gonna have to talk to the CEO of American Airlines about increasing the number of flights. And then flew from Charlotte to Puerto Rico yesterday, and here I am back home for about a week before I go on my next adventure out there.
I have this sense that you actually don't ever settle into any time zone.
I guess not.
That's really what I think.
It would be nice, but I don't think my schedule allows it. Settling is just not part of the.
No. Well, so I thank you for doing this with me today, Yaron. For the rest of us humble people who are at the mercy of government, except for Arizona, right? Arizona doesn't have daylight savings time either. We don't see the point of this exercise through, changing our schedule an hour. Of course, right now we hate it because we've lost an hour last night and everything else. You say it made sense when they were farmers, but there's this article that a follower of mine gave me and said, it says in here that basically what you do is, at least during daylight savings time, you get exposed to more sunlight, which is good for you.
Yeah.
And so that's really the point of it in terms of all human beings. We
all
tend
sit in offices anyway. What sunlight are we getting exposed to? We get exposed to the same amount of fluorescent light. I don't know. I mean, it strikes me as, if it's good for you, just wake up an hour earlier or wake up an hour later, whatever, however it works. Generally in the summer, we get more sunlight than in the winter. So you get exposed to more sun. Anyway, they tell me we should be exposed to about 20 minutes of sunlight every day to get the amount of vitamin D we need, but you have to be topless to really do that because you need the big surfaces of your skin to absorb the sunlight. I don't know that any of us actually does that. So
I don't.
I mean, if you haven't tested for vitamin D deficiency, you should probably do it, because somebody, a friend of ours, once challenged me to do it because I said, I don't need vitamin. And I tested, and hey, I was clearly vitamin D deficient. I think almost everybody today is, because we evolved to get a certain amount of sunlight and we don't get it. I don't think daylight saving time is changing it one iota. I think what should happen, and I think what would happen in rational society, is that employers would have much more flexible working hours. So it's like all these studies show, for example, that teenagers Teenagers' brains don't work before like 10 a.m.
Did I tell you about this from the Air Force Academy? What happened?
No.
Okay. So at the Air Force Academy, I went there, and when I became a new faculty member, they gave us faculty orientation. And one of the sessions that we had to sit through was called Cadet Sleep Cycles. And they talked about the fact that the melatonin cycles, the cadets are young, they're 18 or something. And their melatonin cycles make it that they're just not even awake before, I don't know, 8:30 or something like that. And I'll be damned, it really happened. The very next semester, they decided that they wanted to start classes at 7:30 in the morning after having all of us faculty sit through this session, telling that they're not awake. They're not awake. And I actually taught philosophy to cadets at 7:30 in the morning when they weren't awake.
Yeah, so who said 9 to 5 is the right time to go to work, or that 7 in the morning? We used to have 0-hour classes at 7 in the morning when I was in high school. And I hated them. I despised waking up early in the morning. And who said that that's ideal? I mean, that's part of this Bavarian, German regimentation that really where public schools were established and brought it here. And there has to be a certain type for this and a certain type for that. And the fact is that we know a lot more about the human brain today. We know more about melatonin in teenagers' brains. And it makes no sense. And it doesn't necessarily make sense either to start work at any particular time. So voluntarily, we should be shifting the clock that way. It's none of the government's business. The government has no business other than setting the clock standard and the time zones. Switching the clock in the middle of the year, it's just arbitrary and not the role of government, not part of the role of government.
Yeah, this article that argues in favor of daylight savings time, as far as I can tell, if you actually read the article and take it seriously, what you'll end up thinking is that we should keep the clock on the daylight savings time setting all the time. Because
you get more.
Yeah, you get more.
Most
people stay up later in the day. They get more sunlight. And then winter is hellish anyway, as the article says. So why not just keep it and not shift?
Yeah, I hate it when they turn to the normal clock and suddenly it's dark at 5 o'clock in California. That's terrible. I mean, in California, we have sunlight. It doesn't really matter in the Northeast, right? Because they never see the sun anyway. But,
right.
We see the sun. So why not? So, yeah, so switch it, right? Switch it permanently. That's fine.
Keep it there. And it's been trending that way, right? It's been trending that way because as I understood it, it used to be that we'd have like a month more on each side in the darkness. And now we've got it, I think it's about 8 months of daylight savings time or something. So I think it's a matter of time. They'll make it 10 months and then finally we won't switch it anymore. We'll be like Arizona. Arizona's been that way for 50 years. I don't know about Puerto Rico.
I don't know about Puerto Rico if it ever had daylight saving times, but it doesn't have today.
So yeah, so government would have, we'd have sort of a standard time zone for the country. Proper function of government. Yeah.
You got to do that. There's a convention that's been adopted in terms of where time zones. The government would enforce it by basically it would be functioning on those clocks and everybody could decide whenever they wanted to go. Companies could decide what clock they wanted for the sake of when they wanted the employees to come and when they wanted the employees to leave and so on. So there's no need to have one standardized clock for all employers or for all schools.
Definitely. Okay, so let's get into the fantasy. And I took the liberty of making this the title of our show today, Yaron, because you had actually retweeted this little tweet that I had. It just occurred to me when, Trump was doing all his various policy maneuvers this week. He had his big policy things, by the way, on International Women's Day. He was like stealing International Women's Day for himself. I'm just objecting to that myself as a woman. I just thought I'd say
the whole idea of an International Women's Day is a little offensive.
No, it is certainly, but he's tweeting about it, because his wife was giving away some awards or something, and then he signs the 2 tariffs on that day, and then they have their big announcement from the White House that evening about North Korea or whatever, all on this day. So whatever, take him seriously or not. But I'm just thinking we've talked about this trade in so many ways, right? This issue of whether tariffs can do any good at all, the imposition of tariffs. And to me, that it's a fantasy. It became this idea that it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that changing that accounting number of a trade deficit or a trade surplus makes any difference at all. There's nothing.
It makes it worse. I mean, but I don't think it's a fantasy. I don't know. It's too good of a term to call it a fantasy. This is a real evil. This is stupidity. It's ignorance. It really, and ignorance in the face of knowledge. It's stupidity in the face of smart people. So this is evil. The imposition of trade barriers and the people who are advocating for this. I mean, putting aside people who are still ignorant of this. This requires massive evasion. This is real. What is a fantasy means that you're striving towards something, I guess, make America great again. But since you don't know what America is, and you certainly don't know what greatness is, it doesn't even qualify as a fantasy. It really qualifies as insanity. It's doing something that all of science and all of reality and all of logic and all of reason tell you will fail, and you do it anyway. I mean, That to me is insanity more than anything else. And given that they're not technically insane, the people imposing this, they're just bad people. And Donald Trump, I mean, I've always had a low opinion of him, and my opinion of him just gets lower. It just, if that's possible, it's just he's living up to the worst, my worst opinion of him.
Right. No, I think so. Now, a couple of things. First of all, one of the angles that I got on this, because one of the things I try to do is try to figure out why could people think that a trade deficit is a bad thing? And I'm wondering, have you heard in introductory logic, we have the fallacy of composition?
Okay.
What it means is if you assume that something that's true of each individual within a group is therefore true of the group as a whole. So for example, if every single American had a trade deficit, each individual American, it would be bad for us, right? If we have a trade deficit individually overall, if we are consuming more than we're producing, for example, that is bad, right? So then you think for the country as a whole, therefore it's bad. But the trade deficit numbers have nothing to do with whether we're producing more as a whole than we're consuming as a country. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but you're conflating here. You're conflating here production and consumption. So all a trade deficit means is that we're selling. We're buying more than we're selling. It doesn't say anything about how much we're producing, because a lot of what we produce, we consume internally. So all it says is
right. That's my
more than we're selling to the Chinese. And I think it's an illustration of a zero-sum mentality. It's the idea of zero-sum. And you saw that I did an analysis of his tweets about this.
Yes.
Because tweets illustrated how do you say it? How stupid he is. Because the tweets were, I mean, they basically reflected a zero-sum mentality. He said, oh no, trade with China, trade with Canada, we lose $100 million every year.
Right.
100 billion or whatever the number is. Because his view is, we have this money. And so the other thing is it's a fallacy of the intrinsic value of money, right? Money is what counts. So it's the same that the whole inequality people have. The whole inequality debate is oriented around this, right? So when I buy an iPhone, my favorite example, right? I lose $600. That's the mentality. Right. I lose $600. Or in inequality terms, I get poorer by $600 and Apple gets richer by $600. Now, I mean, that nobody actually thinks that, but nobody actually thinks that when they think. But most people don't think. So if I say I bought an iPhone and I'm poor by $600, everybody says, yeah, okay. And they don't think, okay, but he got a value for it. That takes another level of thinking, right? You're showing your iPhone.
I'm hugging my iPhone.
Everybody gets
Love that thing.
Explain it to them. But people don't think. And certainly anybody who is still an admirer of this president, in my view, is not thinking. Because there's no thinking going on here. There's no consequences. But if you look at his explanations, you see how moronic they are. how infantile they are, how perceptual level they are.
It's really rooted in this pragmatist idea, right? He is out there satisfying demands of whoever's demands he thinks he needs to satisfy at the moment. But I've got two things. First of all, and I talked to you a little bit about this just before the show started. You and I have both on our individual shows sort of apologized for talking about Trump and criticizing Trump so much. And I don't know that we really should do that even. I mean, I know that sometimes we have listeners who still want Trump to have been a better choice to vote for than Hillary, but I wouldn't necessarily blame anybody for having voted for Trump necessarily over, Hillary at that time. But nonetheless, he's our president now. He's doing clearly bad things, and we shouldn't apologize for criticizing him. I sort of wondered if part of the apology is that, and part of the reluctance is that we have a little bit of a disbelief that he actually is our president. It's like, how can this guy be our president? And why do we have to spend so much time talking about this guy? But he's our president, and he's doing things that affect us.
Part of it is a disbelief that not everybody gets it, that not everybody sees what we see. I think that's a big driving force, because to me, it's just unbelievable. And I literally wake up every morning thinking, this can't really, he can't be our president. This didn't happen. And yet, and then I go to Facebook and I go to YouTube or whatever, and I see all these people still raving about him and thinking he is God's gift to America. And some of them are listening right now, I know. And that is what boggles my mind. That is what is frustrating. And I feel like the other thing is, I've been talking about this, about Trump for what? For 2 years almost, right? For a year and a half, certainly. And it doesn't seem to have had any impact. That's the other thing. Nobody seems, here somebody says, Trump haters, you're Trump haters. And then he says, why do so many Jews hate Trump? Because we're smart? I don't know. So it's so frustrating to talk about this stuff and to see it so clearly. I mean, Trump is not, it's not fuzzy to me how bad he is, right? I mean, I thought George Bush was really, really bad. And
I want to tell people, read the inauguration address. Read his inauguration. There is not one mention of the principle on which our country was founded, Constitution. It was all about that he's going to hear the demands of the forgotten people and everything else.
More than that, how many lies did he tell in that inauguration speech? I mean, I bet he told more lies than any other president, and they were all liars too. But he has made an art of it, and he lies constantly, and he's caught at the lies, and nobody cares. No, I mean, I've said this before. I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and you'd still vote for me mentality. And the idea that Americans are holding that and sustaining that, that they're really willing to vote for him no matter what he does. I mean, imagine if Obama had said he's going to meet, and we could talk about this with the dictator, the murderous dictator of
North Korea. Yeah.
I mean, imagine if Obama had said that. I mean, you can't imagine what Fox would be doing right now. You can't imagine what all these people who claim to be America First people would be doing right now, and they would call him the worst names possible. Yes. And yet Trump does it, and I haven't heard any criticism. Really?
Yeah, I mean, you hear it, of course, from New York Times, right? But that's
but New York Times are hypocrites too, because they wouldn't have criticized Obama if he'd done it. They'll criticize Trump. But
before we go there, I want to ask you one question on this trade issue, though, because it's one that's been coming up for me in discussions on Twitter about it. And it's that somehow it's okay if Trump is imposing these tariffs, or at least threatening to, he signed these orders that are going to go into effect unless he gets what he wants, these fair deals, et cetera. If he's doing that just as negotiation, somehow that makes it okay. And I know that all presidents have done this, but it brings to mind, my mind, this question, which is, should a president ever negotiate on the idea that unless you give me what I want, I'm going to initiate force against my citizens by charging them tariffs. I mean,
right? I'm going to shoot my people unless you stop shooting your people. I mean, what is, it doesn't make any sense. It's complete nuts. And by the way, other presidents have done this and failed. So Bush put on, I think it was Bush, put on steel tariffs and had to eliminate them a year later. Reagan put on tariffs and they were a disaster. The steel industry is where it is today, not because presidents haven't tried to save it. They've tried. Every single president has done some kind of tariffs. These are the worst. These are the most extreme of all the tariffs. I mean, China, the reason China imports so little steel into the United States is because there are already all kinds of tariffs and restrictions on Chinese steel, right? China is number 11 on the list of countries that export steel to the US. So steel tariffs in particular have been a political issue forever. And everybody's failed. We still don't have a steel industry because the steel industry spends more time on politics lobbying than it does on getting efficient and becoming productive and becoming competitive. Why are Canadian companies producing steel better than American companies? Labor costs are about the same. Regulations are about the same. They face competition from China as well. Why can't they do it cheaper? Why can they do it cheaper? Because they're more productive. They're more efficient. They're more innovative. I don't know. The fact is that in the United States, our steel companies are not very good. And that's why they go out of business. That's just why they go out of business. So,
do we need a certain level of steel production in terms of safety, security, military security? And if so, how would that be handled properly?
Potential capabilities. So first of all, the largest importer of steel into the United States is Canada. So Canada's an ally, right? So if Canada becomes our enemy, then the worst case scenario is we invade Canada and take their steel mills, right? But Canada's an ally of the United States. What are we afraid of? A steel embargo from Canada? Same with Mexico. The same with Brazil, really. But yeah, I could see the Defense Department saying, look, we want to have some emergency capacity of steel production. Mm-hmm. So we're going to pay U.S. steel companies. We'll write them a check to keep certain steel mills on, what do you call them?
At the ready, kind of.
At the ready. What do you call it when you put them in mothballed, right?
Oh, I've never heard that term. Okay.
Yeah. So they're on the ready. They're closed. There are no expenses associated with them other than basic maintenance, so that if you really needed them, you turn them on. But national security is now being used by Republicans and Democrats all the time. Mm-hmm. And this is the other thing with Trump, right? He used national security to impose these tariffs. Again, a lie. The thing that characterizes most Donald Trump's presidency is his lying and his blatant lying. There's no national security issue here. It's completely bogus. You want to put on tariffs? Put on tariffs. Either go through Congress or do it yourself or whatever the procedure is to putting on tariffs. Don't use bogus national security reasons in order to do it, because
maybe he's not able to do it through a signed order like that unless it's a national security issue. That's my guess.
Yeah. So let's do what Obama did, and Republicans criticized him all the time. And let's do stuff by executive order that you shouldn't be really doing by executive order. And remember what Republicans did. They lambasted him. He was a dictator. He was an authoritarian. And silence with regard to Trump. So no, you can't. There is no negotiating. What's to negotiate? The only the only thing the government should do with tariffs is lower them to zero. Mm-hmm. Or I don't know, if you want a little bit of revenue from them, because they're just as evil as any other tax when we still have other taxes. So let's say make them uniformly across the board, 5%. No,
or something really low, whatever corresponds to checking the stuff when it comes in for security risk or whatever it is, right?
But if you need to have something, but you can't favor any industry or any product or anything, uniformly across the board, 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever it is. That's it. Yes. I mean, the inspection's already paid for. The customs people and all that, the fees at the port, the fees for all of that is already taken care of. But the tax should be zero, ideally, and across the board. And we were getting there. That's the thing. What people don't realize is that since World War II until today, The United States have been cutting tariffs systematically and across the board. And this is true globally. Countries around the world have been reducing tariffs and reducing tariffs and reducing tariffs. And the benefit of that to Americans, the benefit of that to 8 billion people around the world is unmeasurable. It is so large. And it's particularly beneficial in the United States to poor people, to people who are low income, because they're the ones who buy at Walmart. They're the ones who benefit mostly from multinational corporations who can import at a really cheap rate. They're the ones who benefit from the low cost of production in China because they buy cheap goods. My German car, I benefit too because I get a German car. But the people who really, most of what they buy is imported, are poor. And yet, again, nobody cares. Nobody talks about it. Trade, I would argue the U.S. economy would be dramatically, not a little bit, but dramatically smaller. We would be dramatically poorer. Inflation would be dramatically higher over the last 30 years, if not for the amazing trade that we've had, if not for what's going on in China and Vietnam and South Korea and Taiwan and the Asian tigers and even in parts of Africa. And what we want is more of that, much more of that, not less of that. What we want is global trade to explode and to people, a division of labor. Because what is trade? Trade is fundamentally a manifestation of the division of labor, the division of labor to multiply across billions of people. Think how much richer we would be, even in a mixed economy.
Yes.
Even in a mixed economy, even with government regulating, controlling everything that it does, if we had more free trade. And that's what's happened over the last 30 years. And that's why the United States economy has done relatively well over the last 30 years.
Yeah. So even as negotiation technique, you say no way. And
no, because we should be negotiating about trade. So I'm against NAFTA and I'm against all the trade deals, not because I'm against trade, but because I think they raise tariffs too much. Mm-hmm. I want all these trade deals eliminated and just a zero tariff. That's a zero. You can bring in your goods, come bring them in, bring your capital in, bring your goods in. I won't say bring people in because I don't want to get into immigration.
Yeah, no, we don't need to talk about that today. So my term fantasy, I guess, is too weak, but if we can go ahead and then switch over to foreign policy. And, there's North Korea. Apparently, Trump agreed almost immediately to meet with Kim Jong Un. And I also want to maybe talk a little about China and Russia as well in fantasy foreign policy, or you're going to say that fantasy is too kind a term in this realm as well. Yes.
We could add to that selling nuclear technology to the Saudis, which this administration is strongly supporting. Mm-hmm. We could talk about the fact that he's done nothing about Iran. And we could talk about the fact that we have no foreign policy, that the better things that he talked about, like, being tougher on NATO and things like that are gone. We could talk about Turkey and the radicalization of Turkey, and the United States still considers it a friend while they kill our allies in the Middle East. Yeah, we could talk on and on and on about just like every other president since World War II, there is no foreign policy.
About North Korea in particular, he's going to meet with this man and presumably put on hold any other measures that we might have taken to deal with North Korea. Now, North Korea is a mess because, as I understand it, in the 1950s, we should have taken care of the issue, and that there were various stopping points along the way. One of them under Clinton, where we had an opportunity to do something, we didn't do it.
Since the Carter administration, there's been negotiation and constant negotiation, capitulation, them cheating, them advancing, and it never works. It never has worked in history. Look, if there's one principle we have learned from history, or should have learned from history, it seems only we objectivists have learned this from history, is you should not negotiate with evil. The only party to benefit from sitting down with an evil dictator is the evil dictator. Ayn Rand, in the Art of, what's the essay? The Art of Compromise?
Oh, I think so. Anatomy of Compromise?
Anatomy of Compromise. I was going to say she wouldn't write anything about the Art of Compromise. The Anatomy of Compromise. That was dumb. The Anatomy of Compromise. She says when evil and the good negotiate, only evil can win. When the president of the United States sits down with an evil dictator, which the dictator of North Korea is, only the evil dictator can benefit. There's nothing the United States will and can get out of it.
Now, is that true? Is that true even if he's weak? Because some people say, oh, he's so weak, he's on the verge as people are starving or whatever it is. And so therefore it's okay now to sit down with him.
Nobody that hasn't stopped him. But what difference does it make if he's weak or strong? If he's weak, you ignore him more so he falls down. By meeting with him, you're actually giving him a moral sanction. You're giving him permission to exist. You're saying that even the United States of America is no better, considers him a legitimate. You're giving him legitimacy. You're literally giving him legitimacy. You're raising his perception of himself, and at the same time, the perception of his people of him. They're saying, wow, the American president is meeting with him. He must be important. And then what's the compromise going to be, right? There has to be a compromise. And the compromise means the United States giving up something, which means he benefits something. Now, is he going to give in return anything? They always cheat. They've cheated all throughout history. I mean, the only reason to have a meeting with him is to put a bullet between his eyes. I mean,
okay, so
I'm all for using diplomacy to
what about this argument though, that because we have defaulted on what we should have done in the past, and now we have allowed to be created this situation where almost all of the alternatives could involve substantial carnage to South Korea, which is an ally that has relied on us and everything else, right? That we've created this reliance situation, and so that we couldn't necessarily apply straight the ideal foreign policy principle, that somehow we have to acknowledge that we messed up and make some sort of concessions. What do you think of that?
No, I mean, the fact that you screw up doesn't mean you should screw up more, right? The fact that you screwed up doesn't mean you abandon principle. So the reset has to be, we now are not abandoning principles. Previous administrations screwed up. This is our approach. Our approach is, my approach would be, you got to multiple steps. So one step would be to withdraw U.S. troops from South Korea Peninsula, and to tell the South Koreans to have a plan to do that, to tell the North Koreans that every missile they put in the air will be shot down by America. We view it as an act of hostility. Mm-hmm. Use our missile defense system to engage with the North Koreans in knocking down their missiles and show them how impotent they really are. I hope we have that capability. I think we do. Let's show the world that we have it. And I would let the South Koreans, let them know that over the next 5 years, we're withdrawing our troops from South Korea, and that they are responsible for their own defense. They're rich. They can afford it. Let them start building whatever foreign policy they want with North Korea. All we have to do is protect America. And as part of protecting America, we have to make sure that no missile that he launches can ever reach the United States of America. We can do that by having a missile defense system. And second, by using whatever force is necessary in order to take out his capacity. So, for example, putting special forces on the ground to take out his missile technology, blowing up his missile factories, doing anything we can to, sending him, like the Israelis did at one point, a virus into their centrifuges to blow them up. Mm-hmm. Doing anything we can without going to full-scale war that would result in hundreds of thousands of deaths in South Korea, doing anything we can to subvert, to stop, to slow down, to eliminate. And then I would have a complete and utter embargo on him. So surround him completely, have a naval blockade. Don't let a single ship go in and out of North Korea. Nobody should be trading with him, just like we did with Cuba. And if he is so weak, he would fold. That is, his whole regime would crumble and go away. So I don't know where people get this nonsense from, that there's nothing else we could do, or that he's weak, or that meeting him somehow benefits. Now, somebody wrote here, so I'll just address this. Mm-hmm. You say you shouldn't negotiate, meet with evil, but you're okay with trading with evil. No, I'm not. I'm not okay with trading with North Korea. I'm not okay with trading. Now, because North Korea is an enemy of the United States. In terms of foreign policy, you have three categories of countries. You have evil enemies. Mm-hmm. With the enemies of the United States, you do not negotiate and you do not trade. You embargo them completely. It's not tariffs. You don't have tariffs. Tariffs are permitting trade, but taxing your own people. Mm-mm. So so with the Soviet Union, we should not have traded with Iran today, we should not trade. I don't think we should trade with Saudi Arabia either, because I consider them an enemy.
Or Russia.
Well, we'll talk about Russia.
Yeah.
And then there's a second category. The second category is countries that are irrational, that are bad, that are harmful to their own people, that are evil in that sense. I don't think we should have diplomatic relationship with those countries. I include China and Russia and a lot of countries in the world in that category. We shouldn't have diplomatic relationships with them. We shouldn't have an embassy there. We shouldn't have, our leaders shouldn't meet with them, but we should have completely open borders with them. That is, if people want to buy their stuff, they should be able to buy their stuff. But recognizing that the United States has no authority, no representation in these countries, they can't argue for you. So if the Chinese steal your money, it's gone. Sorry, but you cannot compare China to North Korea. China is not threatening to launch missiles against the United States. China's missiles, as far as I know, are not actually targeted at U.S. cities. They're not threatening to use them. They are not daily saying death to America like the Iranians are. It is not, China is not an enemy as I see it. China is an evil regime. So what you do is you decide as an individual whether you want to buy or not. I believe we should trade in Cuba. Cuba is not a threat to the United States. I don't believe we should have an embassy there, but I supported Obama when he did away with the blockade in terms of trading with Cuba. Now, would I buy anything from Cuba? No. I won't buy anything from Cuba because I think it's immoral to buy stuff from Cuba. Would I buy stuff from China? Absolutely. Because I think China is like 100 times freer than Cuba.
Now, what about, though, they just got rid of term limits and it's starting to go in a scary direction? What?
Again, it's going in a scary direction when you have to watch it, and my evaluation of China might change. But what I look as individual freedom, are individuals free to start a business? Are individuals free to keep their money for the most part? Individuals have the basic elements of property rights, not complete property rights because nobody has that, and certainly in China you don't have that, but certain elements of property rights. Can they mostly express themselves? Yeah, if they attack the government, they can, but mostly express themselves, not complete free speech, but mostly. Can they dress the way they want to? Can they buy what they want to? Can they go to the theater? Can they go watch a movie? Now, again, some movies are blocked, some books are blocked. Is Atlas Shrugged available in the bookstores? That's a good criteria. Or has it been banned on the ban list? So if a country like China, basically people produce what they want to produce, they can start businesses, at least in most China, in my experience in China, which is much more extensive. I mean, which is quite extensive. I've done seminars on Ayn Rand. I know people in China. I've spoken to people. I've spoken to intellectuals. I've spoken to business leaders. There is a lot of freedom in China. Now, there's a lot of oppression in China, but so there is in the United States. There's more, but now it's issues of degree. I don't consider voting to be the most important thing. So I think it's important, but it's not the most important thing. So yeah, China's not free, and you should criticize China. And I don't think our leaders should meet with the Chinese leader. I don't think we should have diplomatic relations with the Chinese, but I do not think you have to embargo their trade, because I think I would trade with a Chinese person who's trying to make a better life for himself. In North Korea, any additional money that the North Korean might make from trade goes directly to the government. The same in Cuba. So if you go to Cuba on vacation, you're benefiting the Cuban regime. You're benefiting the Communist Party. You're not benefiting the Cuban person that you're trading with. In China, taxes are still relatively low. They take less than California does, than the federal government in the United States
Don't
does.
tell me that.
True. Taxes in China are low, particularly for entrepreneurs, for businessmen.
Okay. So, China was just one of the different ones. Let's talk a little bit about Russia, though, because, part of this idea of fantasy foreign policy in my mind with China, it was that we could consider China some useful ally in dealing with North Korea. So there's, I think, a fantasy element in that we don't really want to have diplomatic relations with them anyway. And Trump is out there tweeting about how great, helpful China is. Ayn
Rand supported having contact with China in the context of trying to control Russia, right? So she didn't support Nixon going to China because she thought that was too much of a sanction. But she supported having contact with the Chinese and working with the Chinese to control the Russian threat. And I agree. I mean, I have no problem working with China to control North Korea. Indeed, I think we should do a lot more in that regard. And I think if China for 1 second thought that America was serious about defending itself, for 1 second thought that we were really America first, we really placing the American interests first, then I think China would clamp down on North Korea. And I think China has a lot of leverage in North Korea. I think the problem is, how do you establish? I mean, the problem is there's no rational foreign policy. I was going to say, how do you establish a rational foreign policy when we've been so irrational so many decades?
Right.
But Trump isn't trying to establish a rational foreign policy. He is continuing an irrational foreign policy. And therefore nobody takes him seriously. That's not a surprise that the Chinese don't take us seriously. It's not a surprise that North Korea is not afraid of us. And indeed, now that Trump has said he would meet with the dictator, the brutal dictator of North Korea, by the way, which didn't surprise me, because I read one of my shows, I read an interview with Trump where Trump said, "Oh, me and this North Korea leader, we're best friends. We could be best friends." And the reporter said, "But what about all the horrible things you said?" Oh, Trump said, "I say horrible things about everybody, and I can be their best friend tomorrow." I mean, a pragmatist doesn't believe what he says.
Right.
Pragmatist, it means nothing. I mean, chills go down my body when I say this, right? I mean, this guy is the least principled, the most pragmatic, the most anti-intellectual, anti-thinking, everything bad president we have ever had. Now, he is not anti-American in that I think he, some remote place, loves America, or thinks he does anyway, like Obama was anti-American. But he undercuts everything that is America. He is the anti-America in ways that are worse than Obama.
Right. In the sense of the spirit of America, which would be to use reason and exist on principle or some understanding of principle.
So think that America is reason and individualism. That's the essence of America. The founders founded America with principles in the name of individualism. And they were huge proponents of reason, advocates of the efficacy of reason and the importance of reason. And everybody is given lip service to reason and individualism in one way or another. This guy is an emotionalist nationalist. Yep. He is a tribalist. So he is anti-reason and anti-individualism. In that sense, he is more anti-American than any president we've ever had.
Yes.
In many ways, I mean, in some ways, I'm so glad Ayn Rand didn't see America descend to electing Donald Trump as president.
No, definitely. On this issue of lack of ideology and just not taking ideas seriously anymore. And I want to go into Russia, of course, because I want to talk a little bit about what, our policy with respect to Russia. I had fantasy in mind with respect to Russia, by the way, because of Mathis, right? When he talks about that we were attacked by the Russians in Syria. It was the mercenaries, and supposedly, the mercenaries, and he was perplexed, right? He's perplexed as if it's not really the Russians attacking us, but it was. Anyway, there's this interview that...
Somebody's just asking this question. Let me just answer this.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So, Yaron, what's the difference between Trump and Reagan? Oh, my God. I mean, wow. Reagan looks like this rational, incredible, pro-capitalist president right now in comparison. I mean, it's massively different, the difference between them. I mean, as much as I hated Reagan, as much as Ayn Rand didn't vote for Reagan, Reagan was like unbelievably good as compared to this guy. Reagan, again, gave lip service to reason. He gave lip service to individualism. He gave lip service to the founding fathers and the Constitution and the Declaration. He gave lip service to laissez-faire capitalism.
The worst words are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Remember that?
Yeah, making fun of the government.
Right.
And he actually did things. He really deregulated. As I've said before, a lot of that was already done under Jimmy Carter. But he constantly talked the good talk. Now, he landed up not doing that much. Unfortunately. But night and day, I mean, he was this proud man who stood there and advocated for America. He never used profanities. He didn't have sound bites that were just stupid. He didn't say stupid things in such a stupid way, I guess. he treated people generally with respect. He had this, go with the sense of life for this. Now, he made a lot of mistakes. His biggest one is what Ayn Rand identified, which was bringing religion smack into the center of the Republican Party and letting it dominate. And I think that, by the way, I think it's religion that brought about Donald Trump. I think it's the moral majority and the evangelicals who made Donald Trump possible in a funny kind of perverted way. But I think absolutely. And that's all Ronald Reagan's fault. So I'm not saying Ronald Reagan was a giant. He just, relative to Trump, he's a giant. I mean, I said something to Leonard Peikoff about Trump versus Reagan, and Leonard just blew up. I mean, and Leonard was there when Ayn Rand criticized Reagan, and he like thinks Reagan is a superstar as compared to Trump. I mean, it's not on the same planet.
So he agrees with that now too.
Absolutely, he's always
excellent. Excellent. No, very good. So on this thread that I have, there's this, interview that Putin did with Megyn Kelly on the election interference. And he says, I couldn't care less. And so then there was this whole discussion, and Steve Rogers commented, that all of Putin's assertions were basically arbitrary. Putin made an anti-Semitic remark, by the way, in his things that
usually does. I mean,
Jews aren't real Russian citizens, he puts out there, right? But anyway, the essence of it was the arbitrary. And then Steve questions, why are people so concerned about this election interference, which, not so much. It's not, in terms of effect, it probably didn't have any real effect, versus the other bad things that Russia does. So for example, attacking our troops in Syria, assassinating people on British soil with the consequence of also, or not, trying to assassinate on British soil. I guess it ended up
they've assassinated in the past. So this is
this is just part of the trend, right?
On British soil. This isn't the first one. That's
part. Yeah. And so Steve says, why is it that people focus so much on this election interference? And he says, it's weirdly as if people are terrified of ideas, but comfortable with force. And my reply there was, well, that's Trump in a nutshell, is it not? That Trump is comfortable with threatening to initiate force against his own citizens as a negotiation technique, or, comfortable with saying that he admires a Putin in certain contexts and everything else. And when you listen to some of his speeches, he'll actually explicitly call out, quote, ideology. When he talks about ideology, he doesn't mean, people who are ideologues in the negative sense. He dismisses all ideas, the realm of philosophy entirely. He's a true pragmatist.
It's a true pragmatist, which means he's a kind of a materialist. And in that sense, it's all about force. It's all about what he does, and ideas don't matter. Ideas have no impact one way or the other. And if Putin, and he can differentiate. So force is force is force is force, right? I'll never forget that interview with Donald Trump where he's asked about Putin killing journalists. And Donald Trump's response was, not denying it, his response was, well, we all kill, right? Countries, we all kill somebody. So what, right? And don't tell me he didn't say it, because I saw it. The video's online. You can find it. Mm-hmm. He doesn't see, it's complete equivocation. We kill terrorists in Iraq, and there might be collateral damage, and Putin kills people he doesn't like, and there's collateral damage, and it's all the same. There's no difference between our legitimacy and self-defense and Putin's self-defense. He's defending himself, right? There's no difference between a free country and a dictatorship. This is why he can joke and say, I mentioned this in the other show, Xi has just made himself a dictator for life. He's got president for life. Wouldn't it be nice if one day we could do that in the United States? Maybe that'll happen. And he said this, right? And he's not denying that he said it. Now he says it's a joke, but you don't joke into stuff like that. And given what he said about Putin, given his underlying support for Putin, given that he won't get tough with Putin in Syria, given that nobody gets tough with Putin in really anything, the guy, obviously he is sympathetic to dictators. And I think a lot of Republicans are. I think the attitude among people who voted for Trump is, we just need to get stuff done. We just need to get stuff done. And if we have to, if we have to do a simple majority in the Senate instead of getting 60 votes in, let's change it to get a simple majority. And if we have to If we have to have executive orders, let's have executive orders. And we have to use national security, let's use national security. But we need to get stuff done. And that's exactly the mentality that leads towards dictatorship. And it's exactly, and look, the Russians love Putin. I mean, it's true. The Russians do like Putin because he gets stuff done. And he's a very good liar. I mean, he is the model for Trump. He's a very good liar. He seems to get stuff done for them. He manages, he manages to blame all the problems in Russia, and there are lots of problems, on other people, mainly on America, just like Trump manages to blame all the problems we have here in America on the Chinese, or on illegal immigrants, or on the Mexicans. It's the same methodology. I mean, in a sense, Donald Trump has studied the Putin playbook and is running with it. But it is the rejection of ideas. It's a rejection of abstraction. It's a rejection of reason that makes all that possible.
And that's horrible. And I don't want a president who is this myself. And so I'm going to continue to criticize it. Here's a question, though. So is it possible that Trump can succeed in dealing with North Korea and other people in a way that prior presidents haven't, because they recognize in him the potential to be crazy and make good on the threats, even to his own people, that he puts out there? So it's like all these countries believe that he wants to have the 25% tariff on steel and, 10% on aluminum. They believe that he is that crazy, that he will go ahead and do this in order to achieve a so-called win in trade.
There's no evidence to suggest that is true. Zero evidence. So
no, but I mean, he doesn't care. He doesn't care if he's harming us in order to achieve his ends. And so the other people maybe recognize that Trump is a new low, for example, in American leaders.
We haven't seen that. We haven't seen the Russians back down. We haven't seen North Korea back down. By the way, North Korea has invited former presidents to come and have a summit. Luckily, they all turned the North Koreans down, and Trump, the only difference is Trump hasn't. But there's nothing different here. So somebody on the thing asked, I don't remember Yaron criticizing Obama like this, right? And no, that's partially true. I criticized Obama all the time, and I called him the first anti-American president in history, and all of this, but not quite with the same energy as I do with Trump. And the reason is that people like Robert Reich and other people constantly claim, and people who claim to be objectivists constantly claim, that Donald Trump is like an objectivist president, or Donald Trump is somehow, his views are somehow similar to mine. I am going to go after somebody like that 1,000 times more than somebody who's obviously not similar to me. There is nothing, zero, nada similar between me and Donald Trump, or between Ayn Rand's ideas and Donald Trump. There is nothing that makes it similar. I didn't have to distance myself from Obama. Nobody claimed, oh, Obama, he's just an Ayn Rand guy, or Obama,
right?
Yaron agrees with everything Obama does. Everybody understood that. So it's really, really important, in the name of the ideas that we believe in, to distance ourselves from people who some people think are similar when they're not, when philosophically, from an underlying perspective, there's no difference between Trump and Obama. There really isn't. And in some respects, I would argue that Trump is worse because he supposedly represents the right, the so-called right.
Well, and also because he abandons principle in such a blatant way that Obama did not dare do.
People don't understand this. They don't understand that it matters how you say things. It matters how you present yourself as president of the United States. It matters that you come across as a bully and a bore and a moron. That matters, that it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. As much as I hated Obama, he had a certain dignity to it. He represented the office in a certain mannerism that had—
Well, I used to criticize Obama for some of that, though, too. I had a whole series of shows, and I called it Nihilism with Respect to the Office of the President. And I'll give you one example. Obama went to one of these National Press Club dinners or whatever, where they all roast each other or something, right? And this was how he was introduced. You hear over the, PA system in the room, this big fancy banquet room with all these journalists and everything. You hear Obama and he's talking with somebody or whatever, and then you hear him flush a toilet.
Yeah.
This is at this fancy press club dinner, and he's supposedly president of the United States, and he's doing something, and you're hearing him and flushing toilets and stuff, that kind of stuff. Or, when he would go on this basketball thing, or he'd go on the late night TV. And so I used to criticize, but I agree with you that Trump has taken that whole thing to a new low. I don't even bother to count it as part of that series.
4-letter words and tweets that make absolutely zero sense, or that reflect complete ignorance and malice and stupidity.
Bleeding out of or whatever about that journalist.
Tweet nonsense. I'm going to call you on it. And if Obama, I used to tweet Obama's inaugural addresses, not his inaugural, his State of the Union addresses. That's the lambast. Every sentence he said. You guys just don't remember. Somebody wrote here, you shouldn't love or hate a president. You should just criticize the action and behavior. No. I love and I hate. I mean, this idea that you don't love what's good and you don't hate what's evil. This guy's evil, and I hate him. I hate him 1,000 times because he's the president of the United States, and a president of the United States should be a lot better.
Definitely.
No, I don't think Obama was worse. I know I'm going to get killed now, and I'm going to lose those 1,000 people that added me on Facebook and everything else, but I don't think Obama was worse. I think Obama was really, really bad. In a different way, and did immense harm to the United States in a different way. And I think Trump is doing immense harm to the United States and is really, really bad. Who is worse? History will decide. But yes, they're both really, really, really bad. They're both in that lowest rung of presidents. I would put them both as among the worst presidents this country's ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, Obama set us up for Trump, and then the concern is what Trump is going to set us up for next. Some people are predicting that we'll have an out-and-out capitalist. Now, I don't know if you've seen this article from New York Times, Bannon. Headline, Steve Bannon is done wrecking the American establishment, and now he wants to destroy Europe's as well. I want to say
something about Russia, because we didn't finish Russia.
Oh, yeah, we didn't finish Russia. Yeah, go ahead.
Russia, I think, is becoming a real enemy of the United States. I think it's becoming a real threat to the United States. It's attacking our troops in Syria. Not that I know why we have any troops in Syria. And it's killing people in Great Britain, which is an ally. So it's certainly become an enemy of Great Britain. And there's a real question. Now, I think the reason Russia is becoming so emboldened is because they realize Trump is so weak. So it's exactly the opposite of what you said earlier. Okay. It's Trump's bombastic attitude, his irrationality, his emotionalism that the Russians are taking advantage of. They know they can get away with murder right now, and Trump will absolutely do nothing, partially because he likes Putin. So I think this is a phenomena in foreign policy forever. When you are weak, you have more enemies. When you are strong, you have very few enemies and you have lots of friends. We are weak. We were weakened by Obama. We were weakened by Bush. We were really weakened by Obama. And we are even weaker now under Trump. And the weaker we get, the more emboldened our enemies will become. And the more powerless our friends will become.
Well, and the weakness I would describe as we're weak in that we are more unprincipled than we even were before in foreign policy, as if that's possible, because now he's going to go talk with Kim Jong Un.
There's no foreign policy. Yeah. We don't know what we're doing in Syria. We don't know what we're doing with ISIS. We don't know what we're doing with the Kurds, with Israel, with any of these countries.
Nuclear technology to Saudis.
We're selling nuclear technology maybe to Saudi Arabia. We have. We don't like the Iranians. We say bad things about the Iranians one day, and then we do something completely different the next day. There is no coherent foreign policy. There is no, there's no sense that the people running American foreign policy know what they're doing. You've got the Secretary of State saying one thing and the president contradicting him. You've got the president first saying, I'm going to bomb North Korea, basically, and then being willing, and then telling his State Department, telling the State Department, I'll never negotiate with him. We don't negotiate with him, and then being willing to meet with him. Right. I mean, you go over and over and over and over. He switches, he changes his mind every 5 minutes. There are no principles. He doesn't believe in principles.
So in that environment, you think Russia could become a true, real threat to the United States?
They already are becoming. They're getting more and more aggressive. The only thing holding back the Russians right now is that they're poor. The nice thing about dictatorships is they get poor, and China's going to get the same thing. This idea that by increasing Xi, I think his name is Xi's power, China is going to become weaker. It's going to become weaker economically, which will lead to its weakness. Foreign policy wise or militarily. So generally, this will lead to China and Russia, because they're authoritarian, are weak internally and potentially more aggressive externally. That's the other thing that, again, the way dictators deal with weakness internally is to create enemies. Trump does it, right? And
that's dramatized so wonderfully in Orwell's 1984.
Exactly. Now, in 1984, we're living it. We're not living the details. Luckily, we're not living, but we're living
some of it. We're living some NSA and all that as well. So
think about the doublespeak. Think about how our politicians, and again, Trump, use words and what they mean by those words. So yeah, I mean, it's.
Yeah. What was the one that he had this week when he talked about, there was a euphemism that I called him on when he announced his trade deal, or not his trade deal, but his tariffs that he signed. Let me see if I can go find that really quick.
So I think you really have to watch Russia. I think Russia is getting more emboldened. I think as its economy struggles internally, it will become more emboldened to lash out. It's already won in the Middle East. The United States, now nobody takes seriously the United States in the Middle East. Russia is the dominant world power in the Middle East. Iran is the ultimate winner in the Middle East. It controls most of the northern part of the Middle East. In Turkey now, they used to be Iran's enemy. They used to be America's ally, has now become Iran's ally and the US's enemy, or at least not yet explicit enemy, but at least implicit enemy. A complete realignment of the Middle East is happening. The Saudis don't trust us anymore, so they want nuclear bombs themselves so they can defend themselves. So they on the other hand, it could be the one good thing happening in the world today, which has nothing to do with Donald Trump. The one good thing that might be happening in the world today is it might be the case that there is a soft, quiet revolution going on in Saudi Arabia that is basically throwing out the radicals, throwing out the militants, throwing out the fundamentalists, and really reforming Saudi society. And that could be happening. I'm not sure it is, but it looks like there's a lot of signs that it's happening. And that
women getting to do the run is the most recent one that I saw.
Yeah,
did you see?
Yeah, women getting to do the run. They're now allowed to go to soccer fields. But these are little things. The big things are, that a lot of these clergy are now, a lot of the clerics are now in jail, that a lot of the princes are being killed or being put in prison, that there seems to be a consolidation of power around this heir to the throne who seems to be very friendly towards the West and Western values. Here's something he did. He was in Egypt. He was in Egypt last week, I think. And he is the first Saudi royal to ever go and meet with the Pope of the Christians the Egyptian Christians, the Copts, have a Pope, have an Pope. And he went and met with him and went to the church and got a tour and talked positively. And for a Saudi prince to go into a church, never mind to go and meet a religious leader of a Christian faith, is unthinkable. 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago. And this guy did, and he gave all indications of religious tolerance and all this stuff. So it might very well be that we're seeing a real soft revolution on the Sunni side to counter the radicalization on the Shia side. Now, we'll see how it all plays out in the end if he's not assassinated, and a million other things could happen. But it looks like he is the best thing to happen in the Arab world since maybe, what's his name, Anwar Sadat, who cut a peace deal with Israel when he was president.
What about what I had read was that there was a lack of due process and all the people that he was locking up in the hotel jail or whatever. Did that bother you?
It has no due process. There was a lack of due process. Of course there was. What due process? It's Saudi Arabia. It's a kingdom. And kingdoms don't have due process.
So that didn't disturb you. You think that the people that he locked up really were the bad people? This is what Trump, by the way, praised him and said, "Oh yeah, he's rounding up all the bad guys," essentially in Twitter.
I think so. I don't have certainty around it, but the best of my understanding, he is trying to do what he can to move the country towards a more liberal regime, liberal in the classical sense.
I guess time will tell.
We will see, but you know, you got to be optimistic, you got to be hopeful sometimes, and you got to find some positive signs out there in the world. And that's a whole other topic we should talk about sometimes, about how ultimately we have to be, how we can be optimistic in spite of all this garbage. Because, you know,
I've got a whole metaphor that I remind myself of when I do this. So I talk about velocity wise, you know, if you talk about, and you know, all this velocity vectors and everything, you did your engineering. So velocity wise, yeah, we're still traveling ultimately in a bad direction politically right now. But if you think of acceleration, with the influence of Rand's ideas in places around the world, that is maybe slowing the trend down, or it has potential to slow the trend down.
Technology and our advancement of technology and our standard of living is going up and all these other things. But one of the reasons I think I apologize for going after Trump is because I don't really want to. It's boring. I find it boring to talk about Trump because what more is there to say? I mean, again, he's stupid. He's a moron. He's unprincipled. He's anti-intellectual. Everything else is a concrete, right? And I've said it like for a year and a half. I feel like a broken record. And so I'm a little bored with it. So somebody's saying, do you disagree that Trump is the cause of the collapse of ISIS in Iraq? Absolutely, I disagree with that. ISIS was on the verge of collapse before Trump ever showed up. ISIS was going to collapse no matter what. Russia is probably more responsible for ISIS's collapse than the Assad regime's strength, and the Kurds and the Iraqis. Donald Trump did marginally a little bit more than Obama did, but not a lot. Not a lot. So,
you know, by the way, Trump unveiled his slogan, his re-election slogan.
Trump destroys them in 6 months. Give me a break. Give me a break. Trump didn't do almost anything to destroy them in 6 months. You know, slightly more troops, slightly more air power, but it's the Iraqis getting serious and actually going after them. With U.S. advisors and U.S. military that were there from the Obama era, finally destroyed ISIS. Trump does not get any credit for that in my book, or very little credit for that in my book. A tiny bit of loosening up of the rules of engagement, but all of it is very tiny. ISIS should have taken 3 weeks to destroy.
We'll switch to a little bit of populism and fantasy in Europe in a sec, but I just want to tell you what Trump's slogan is going to be for his re-election campaign in 2020.
Okay.
And I would say this is entirely consistent with the fantasy theme. Yeah. Keep America great.
Keep America great. Yeah. Yes. He's already made it great.
Exactly. By then he will have already made it great. And so therefore it's just keeping America great. You know, there is the whole thing isn't America still great anyway? So, you know, make America great again. He's saying it's not great and he's the one who's going to make it great, but then keep it because he did it. Bannon, who helped us get Trump in the first place, is apparently now trying to destroy the European establishment. And of course, Europe doesn't necessarily need a whole bunch of help in this regard, because it seems that we have exported, or maybe they've just caught on to a lot of the same sentiments that we've had here. One thing that I've talked about is that, you know, we don't really have a trade deficit in terms of not really ideology, because it's not like it's an ideology that we've been exporting, but in a way we've exported the same sentiments that have given rise to Trump to other places in Europe. And in fact, here's Bannon going over there.
Because they had them before us. I mean, there's a long tradition of this nationalism, tribalism. I mean, Europe is, and I apologize to all my European listeners, Europe is a tribal continent. It is divvied up into tiny little countries, which is sole reason for their existence is that they were a different tribe than the country next door. Right? When Czechoslovakia was freed of communism, they couldn't wait to split into two so the Czechs could have their country and the Slovakians could have their country. God forbid the Czechs and the Slovakians get along and have one country. Right. I mean, the whole principle of Europe, at least since the 19th century and the nationalist movements of the 19th century, and the deals that happened after World War I and after World War II, which collapsed constantly, right? But they never learned the lesson. And I had this discussion with Fleming Rose because he said there's no multicultural model in Europe. I mean, we don't know what to do with other cultures coming in, because the fact is that Europe has always been focused on separating cultures and little ethnic tribes apart from one another.
Well, but what about the EU, the formation of the EU? Wasn't this a positive trend in a different direction?
Yeah, it was a positive trend, but it's not lasting. And what you're seeing is a huge backlash against it. And but the EU.
But here is the backlash that's happening in part because there has been a rise in the popularity of these tribal type sentiments here in the United States. No, you don't think at all. It's just.
No. When it comes to stupid philosophies or bad ideas, when it comes to bad ideas, Europe takes the cake. I mean, they lead. Other than pragmatism and progressive education.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's pragmatism that we're exporting now.
Pragmatism we export, but I don't think over there it's pragmatism. Look, Europe has always been a mess. That's why it has these unbelievably bloody, horrible wars going back hundreds of years.
But for example, like Five Star that just did so well in the Italian elections. You know, they're putting together this.
It's a populist nationalist movement.
Very pragmatist. I mean, they had no set ideas, and they kept changing their platform according to what was going to win them the polls or the votes.
But that's European. I mean, that's not new in Europe. I think that's old in Europe. So, okay. So we're exporting a little bit of our pragmatism to them, or some elements of.
Or it's reigniting is the way I would maybe think of it.
No, but it started in Europe and came here. I mean, the whole Le Pen National Front in France has been around for a long time. The movement in Hungary. And in Putin in Russia, and the elections in Poland all precede Donald Trump's, all those regimes moving. I think what happened in the United States reinforced that. But while Europe in terms of nationalism is a disaster and has been. I mean, it's led nothing to war and destruction. And it's really interesting to me that now there's a backlash against the European Union. Now, there's a justification for the backlash because the European Union is taking on authoritarian guise. So people are opposed to it, and it's taking on. But the people who are adamantly against the European Union are mostly against the European Union for nationalist grounds, not because they want less regulation, but because they want to be regulated by their own people. This is my thing with Brexit. That they could have turned it into something good, but it's gonna be a disaster because the British are just gonna want the same regulation just imposed on them by people of their own culture, of their own nationality. Europe is a disaster, and the only exception is Switzerland, and it's not an accident that Switzerland is the freest country. Actually, I just saw the freedom index of the world. So it takes personal freedom and economic freedom, and it combines them into one index. Okay. And guess what country is number one in the world?
Which?
Switzerland.
Wow.
It's the freest country in the world if you aggregate both economic freedom and political, social, individual freedom, what they call individual freedom. Switzerland's number one. Hong Kong is number two. Hong Kong's number two primarily because it has such a high economic score that it can afford to have slightly lower. And I think New Zealand is number three. But a number of European countries are above the United States. United States is number 11.
Yes.
Sweden and all these are higher because they have personal freedoms. They have higher than the United States. Even their economic freedom, they're a little lower because they're just a little lower. Anyway, my point is Switzerland is the only multi-tribal state that functions well, right? And I think it's partially the fact that they're not nationalists, that they're not about race and about ethnicity and about the tribe, that there's something that unites them that above that. So Switzerland is the closest you have to the United States. And Europe is reverting back to this idea of the tribe. And the tribe, you see Hungary now is is fascist, basically. You know, there's no freedom of speech. The government controls the media. I'm speaking there, by the way, in April. I'm speaking in
Wow.
Poland. They're passing all these anti-free speech laws. They are, you know, they're restricting them economically. They're not free. They're collectivist completely. And now Austria has elected this right-wing political party that, again, is completely tribal and collectivist and anti-free speech. And so but this is, Ayn Rand wrote about this. She called it the essay on Balkanization, right? And of course, what she predicted would happen in the Balkans happened, right? There used to be one big country called Yugoslavia. Today, what are there, 7 countries? I mean, and I go to these countries, and one of them has 300,000 people. And like, why you have a country? Oh, because we're Montenegrins. And why is that important? And why does that make you different than Bosnians or Serbians or Croatians? Oh, no. We're Montenegrins. We have an identity. And when you combine identity, nationalistic identity with politics, only bad things can happen. And they're happening in Europe now, not because of America, but because of their own dynamics that have been going on for hundreds of years. And what used to be the case is America used to be a model to stand against that. And now that has gone away. So now we're becoming just like Europe. We're doing what Obama wanted us to do. Obama wanted America to become like Europe. We are becoming like Europe. So Obama won. And Trump is helping the Obama to victory.
Yeah, playing right into it. In terms of the Italian election, what do you think? Because, you know, I don't think the coalition's actually been formed yet, but they all have to talk to this 5-star, which is, I think, their sort of answer to Trump in a way. But one of 5-star's campaign promises was universal basic income. So as soon as the election was done, apparently people started to go to line up at the public offices waiting for their handout.
Italy's useless. I mean, what's the point, right? I mean, I remember the days where Italy used to replace its government every 6 months. And so,
this was 5 years, I think, in between elections.
Yeah, no, it's not 5 years.
But I think that's what I read.
In Italy, it's unusually stable. But no, Italy's a joke. I mean, there's nothing, and Italy's in real big economic trouble now with this government that'll have no real power and will have no real agenda because they're complete nothings. It's going to get into more economic trouble. Their banks are basically bankrupt and they keep bailing the banks out. Their industry is completely beholden to the unions. So the unions completely cripple Italian industry. The massive welfare state, primarily redistributing wealth from the rich north to the poor south, and they keep redistributing more and more of this wealth, and it keeps staying poor. It's the whole thing. I mean, Italy's just one more example of the decline of Europe, and the decline of Europe not caused by Muslims, but caused by Europeans and by nationalism, by Balkanization, by unprincipled thinking, by socialism, by nihilism, by everything that has to do with it. So it's unions. Somebody's asking about unions in Italy. Unions in Italy have huge political power, and they hold basically the industry by the balls, and the industries can't do anything without getting union permission for everything. And people who buy Italian companies quickly close the factories in Italy and move them to Eastern Europe, where they can hire people who work and who are not going to be crippling the company with union. All right, we got like 5 minutes.
Okay. One more bit of fantasy for you here, which is the California bullet train system.
That's funny.
Big boondoggle.
Somebody said they could buy a electric car for every Californian.
Every San Francisco, you could replace with an electric car. So every San Franciscan could have a brand new Chevy Volt and still have millions to spare for the price of this.
No, this is it's unbelievable. I mean, it's the bullet train, and not only is it a bullet train. I mean, I could understand somewhat, right? If you're running a bullet train from LA to San Francisco, right? There's a lot of traffic there. It'll be incredibly useful. Who doesn't hate going to the airport and waiting for a 1 hour flight? I mean, it's just, and if you could get on a train that's comfortable, you could do work in the meantime. You wouldn't have to come an hour early and all this nonsense. And you could just zip, and it was really, really fast, right? If it went 300 miles an hour, like some of the bullet trains do in Japan and China, then it would be, then I could see it. Even then, I wouldn't advocate for government money being used for it. But no, this train is from nowhere to nowhere. It's like from Fresno to Sacramento or something like that. Right. Well, nobody actually travels. It wouldn't reduce traffic anywhere. It's just well, it's California. It's California politicians throwing money down the drain. It's not going to reduce traffic anyway, except in a Central Valley where nobody wants to be.
And again, would you say that my use of the term fantasy to encompass that is too kind?
Oh, yeah. This is sheer evil. I mean, this is $77 billion. And by the way, Republicans who control the House and the Senate have allocated money for this. They haven't reduced it. It's part of the budget they pass. Where's the budget constraints of Republicans? They've been in power. They've had the House and the Senate since 2004, right? Mm-hmm. 2014. No. When did Obama get elected? 8. So they controlled it from 2010 on. How come this is getting funding? This is getting massive federal funding. How come this is getting funding? Don't blame Jerry Brown. Blame Republicans in Congress.
We actually have federal money going to this too, not just the Democratic state government.
No, the state couldn't afford this. No, this is massive federal government. And Trump's budget includes this. And remember, everybody who wants to praise Trump, we haven't even talked about Trump's budget. We haven't talked about government spending going through the roof, all of that. We haven't talked about all that stuff where he's just as bad as everything else on.
And he funds refugees in his budget. So if we wanted to really, that was when we talk about the immigration stuff, I always bring up the fact, why doesn't he just take out funding for refugees? Don't fund refugees. And then you don't have this problem, right?
Well, you could collapse a lot of the statist programs by just not funding them.
Exactly.
But have never used that mechanism. They didn't do it for Obamacare and they didn't do it for anything else, but they could have and should have. It's pretty unbelievable that this train is going ahead. It's going to be one of these great government projects that people are going to point at and laugh. You see, this is what happens when governments do things, and they'll learn exactly zilch, nothing from it. So.
No, it's sad. But yeah, kudos to Timothy Sandifer for pulling out the calculator and telling you all the wonderful things you could have had for this money, huh?
It was Sandifer?
Yes, Timothy Sandifer. Yeah, he's and there's a bunch of different things he says. Instead of buying this, you could buy this, or you could buy this. And
he's really good. I mean, he's really good. He's one of those good thinkers out there.
Great sense of life as well. In which actually I'm going to tell people, go over to the blog at don'tletitgo.com, because one of the articles that I have is civility isn't surrender, and it brings up this topic that you and I just kind of touched on earlier, which is you don't have to be rude and bombastic or anything else to stand up for
more than that views. So Antifa, you saw the video of Antifa coming at me at the so a number of people said, why didn't you swing at them? Why didn't you take them out? Why didn't you use your Krav Maga skills that you learned in the Israeli army to take out a bunch of people? Now, 2 reasons for this. One is why? I mean, why am I going to get my hands bloody? I mean, these people are pathetic. They make themselves look like fools. Nothing would have been achieved by going after them. And
if they had taken a blow at you, you would have, right?
Oh yeah, if they'd taken a swing at me, I would have defended myself. But I'm not going to go out of my way to go after them. I kind of smiled and looked semi-amused, because I usually am amused by these kind of types and these kind of freaks, and gained 1,200 followers. Now it's true, if I would have taken a swing, I probably would have gained a lot more. But think of this, and I know you guys don't think of this. I'm 56 years old. I know zero Krav Maga. Don't tell the Antifa guys this, but I know zero Krav Maga. They did not train me in the Israeli army to defend myself other than with a weapon. If I had a gun there, I could have used that. But I do not know any self-defense tricks. So all of you think that I can beat these people up. I can't. They're in their 20s and 30s.
Contribute to his Patreon so he can take Krav Maga classes. So.
Yeah, no, and I'm not going to take Krav Maga classes. Plus, I have to think about my back. I get
yes.
My back might go out, and I'm done. So really, I mean, the first thing you're gonna do is jump into the fray and start punching away. They're much younger than me. Now, my belief is, and I think this is true, is if you punch them, they run away, because I think they're all cowards. Nobody accepts people asking about Krav Maga. Nobody except special forces study Krav Maga in the Israeli military. Not the paratroopers, not the tank corps, and certainly not military intelligence. We didn't study Krav Maga. So I'm in great health, but I'm not going to go up and fight a group of 20, 30 years. Plus the audience did a great job punching them and going after them. So, all right, guys, I think it's time. I need to go to dinner.
Thank you so much. And so next week we can do the typical Saturday. Are you okay?
Saturday, I'm not traveling at all this week, which is strange.
Yay.
Week after that, I'm doing talks in Wilmington. Everybody there from Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm doing a talk in Wilmington, North Carolina at the university. Where else am I giving talks? Wilmington, North Carolina. Oh, Cornell. If you want to come to Cornell, I'm giving a talk to Cornell. That'll be cool. And then I'm giving a talk. Then the week after that, I'm giving a talk in Orlando with Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin and me on the role of government. So that should be fun. So if you're in Orlando, I don't think anybody lives in Cornell, Ithaca, New York. I mean, why would anybody live in Ithaca, New York? Or Wilmington, North Carolina, then come see a live event. It'll be fun. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.